What's up, nerds? Okay, so looking at the 20th century, this was a time of great upheaval. World War One happened just like 10 years after that century began, killed millions upon millions of people, and then they went for a sequel just a couple decades later, killed much, much more people, and then that trend just continued throughout this century with the Vietnam War, Korean War, and that's just in America, not even in all the other countries in the world. There was just throughout the century, there with all these wars, there was just genocide on an unprecedented scale, the likes of which we'd never seen. And we saw representations of that throughout the music of the century. Specifically, and a good example is like the Nagasaki piece that we listened to back at the beginning of the unit. So, the two isms I chose to discuss. The first one is primitivism. Primitivism is simply just basically taking old folk songs and adding to that a little bit. We discussed that mostly in the class. Concerning whether or not it was used to combat the emotional elements of romanticism. It could have very well have been done in a way to combat that, to combat the highfalutin feel of the romantic music. The two composers from that era, or from that subgenre or subsection, I guess, I chose are Igor Stravinsky and Bela Bartok. Igor Stravinsky is known for The Rite of Spring. Bartok's most famous piece is Allegro Barbaro. Bartok being the guy who made those piano books for children, and Stravinsky being, I believe, Russian. All right. The Beatles also, one thing I found interesting is that the Beatles used primitivism from time to time in their music. I couldn't find any good examples of that, but I know they did it. The other one I chose is minimalism. Minimalism began in the 1960s, around the time of the Vietnam War. The characteristics of this style, they use very few notes, very few instruments, and very few words, and oftentimes they move in endless circles, the music. In many cases, they use non-instrumental sources, such as what we saw with the John Cage music, where the guy would just like kick a microwave and that was music, apparently. I chose four composers for this one that seemed to be very important: Steve Reich, Philip Glass, John Cage, and Terry Riley. For Steve Reich, his piece that I chose as a representative of his work was Music for 18 Musicians. That's the only minimalist piece that I actually liked. For Philip Glass, I chose Metamorphosis. For John Cage, Living Room, and for Terry Riley, In C. Uh, yeah, this was definitely an era. I'm glad it got replaced. See ya.